Nightline will not be seen tonight, so we can bring you this special broadcast from ABC News.
Good evening, I'm Peter Jennings in Washington. Once again, we welcome you to a most unusual event. Members of the U.S. Congress in debate with members of the Supreme Soviet, broadcast live and unedited in the Soviet Union and the United States. An historic series of international exchanges which began in September with questions of mutual security and arms talks.
I would like to say to you that the so-called imbalance in conventional armaments in favor of the Warsaw Treaty is a legend.
First of all, we just flat out disagree about the facts.
And then in October, questions and charges of human rights abuses.
It is still incomprehensible to us here in the United States, knowing the value that we place in individual human rights, that Beatrice would be precluded from immigrating to the United States.
The United States citizens would have felt much better about the Soviet Union and your discussions about human rights if Yuri Balablenkov had been on that list, if Victor Fremark had been on that list, or Leon Charny had been on that list. And I frankly could go through a list of hundreds.
If you could give us some sense that you're breaking out of that iron dictatorship from the Kremlin. That's what's holding you back. Everybody knows it. You know it.
More than 300 million people have watched so far, and tonight, the third broadcast in our series.
Live from the Kremlin in Moscow, before an audience of the Supreme Soviet, and live from the Capitol in Washington, before an audience of the Congress. This is ABC News, Capital to Capital, on the eve of the summit. Reporting from Washington, here now, Peter Jennings.
If you have been with us for even part of the first two of these debates, you will already know that on both sides of the Great Divide, members of Congress and the Supreme Soviet have not been shy about making their case. We are fortunate again to have two very effective senators as our principal guests here in the Capitol. Senator Nancy Kassebaum of Kansas, she is a Republican and a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And Senator Bill Bradley of New Jersey, he is a Democrat and a member of the Intelligence Committee, among others. The principal Soviet guests tonight are Evgeny Primakov, a member of the Central Committee. In the Soviet Union, he has publicly endorsed cutting the defense budget in order to redirect the country's resources. And Alexei Yeliseyev, also a member of the Supreme Soviet and a former cosmonaut. He's been in space 3 times. He was the Soviet's mission controller during the Apollo-Soyuz spaceflight in 1975. And just one other note before we actually go to Moscow. These broadcasts are seen all across the 11 time zones of that vast nation, and in some cases we have been discussing subjects which are taboo in the Soviet press. With a little background on that, here's our Moscow Bureau Chief, Walter Rogers.
People in the Soviet Union had never seen nor heard anything quite like it.
And the plain fact, and all of you know it, it's been part of your agony as a people, that through most of this century, the Soviet Union has been a hell for human rights.
В Советском Союзе был ад для прав человека.
The outspokenness of the American side angered Soviet moderator Leonid Zolotarevsky, who later said,
Frankly speaking, several times during that program, I had the feeling that now I'm going to explode.
Editorial writers for Soviet newspapers also complained. One calling Capital to Capital a dialogue of the deaf. Another man wrote, our representatives were not forceful enough in the face of American impudence. Despite the criticism, these programs are extremely popular in the Soviet Union. There are no Nielsen ratings here, but Soviet television estimates over 100 million viewers.
These kinds of programs are really necessary. They should be increased.
I think Washington thinks improperly about human rights in the Soviet Union.
We like the advertising. It was interesting.
The program did prompt dozens of Soviets to call the ABC bureau in Moscow to describe human rights violations. And at the ABC studio in Washington, emigres besieged the Soviet ambassador requesting exit visas for family members.
We wanted him to act as human being who sees the suffering of the family.
The Cherney family is still waiting for the release of Benjamin Cherney. But Elena Balavlenkov, who was in the Washington audience last month, has now been told that her husband Yuri will be allowed to leave. And yesterday in Vienna, there was this reunion. After 10 years, the Friedman family, profiled by the ABC side of Capital to Capital, was allowed to rejoin their grandson in the West. Walter Rogers, ABC News, Moscow.
And just before our discussion begins in earnest, the one person on the Soviet side who I have not yet introduced, he's been with us in all three, he is the Soviet moderator. His name is Leonid Zolotarevsky. Good evening, Leonid. Let me just tell our audience again that Leonid is a member of the International Department at Gostel Radio.
Good evening, Peter.
And a former Soviet television correspondent in Afghanistan. Leonid, thank you for being with us again. I wondered if I might begin by addressing the first question from here in Washington to Mr. Primakov. Mr. Primakov, in America, we have followed Mr. Gorbachev's policy of Glasnost with enormous care and attention, and many of us, quite frankly, are puzzled. The party chief in Moscow, Mr. Yeltsin, was fired last week because, as we understand it, he criticized Mr. Gorbachev for going too slow with reform. Now, it's our understanding that with Glasnost, criticism is welcome. What on earth did he say that got him fired?
Well,
you see, you're turning everything upside down, because Comrade Yeltsin was freed from the duty of a first deputy of the Communist Party because he wasn't up to the task. He wasn't tackling his work properly as a secretary of an organization, as a party organization in Moscow. This is one of these central organizations. At the same time, I'm surprised that you don't seem to be adequately informed, and because it was indicated yesterday that Mr. Yeltsin has been appointed first deputy, the president of the Gostroy of the Soviet Union, as a minister of the Soviet Union. So I think that this reply precludes any further questions on this.
It is true, we do understand that in fact he's going to be the #2 man in charge of construction throughout the Soviet Union. We're puzzled though because we read all the denunciations of him, but we didn't read his remarks. Is there a reason for that?
I don't think that all Soviet Party members have to speak in the United States. I don't think either that all your senators, Democrats or Republicans, are obliged to set forth their views, obliged to, may I emphasize, before a Soviet audience.
Senator Bradley.
If you will, I'd like to ask you to listen to my colleague and friend, Mr. Yeliseev, Deputy Yeliseev, a cosmonaut, who actually participated in the discussion of this issue in the Moscow Town Committee. He could say a few things about this, I think.
I think you've already described it sufficiently well. Boris Nikolaevich Yeltsin was at the plenum of the Moscow City Committee, and he could not control the Moscow organization and keep up with the movement in the direction of democratization in the work of the party. He is for very strict administrative measures, and this is not coherent with today's direction of party work, and so therefore it was considered that it was correct to free him of his responsibility. And Yeltsin himself is a construction specialist, and today he has been appointed to a very large construction work in his country.
In the statement in the meeting of the party, it was published in all our newspapers.
Senator Bradley.
If I could, I think that there might not be sufficient appreciation on the Soviet side that the world is watching. And many Americans are rethinking our relationship with the Soviet Union, and the fundamental question is what is possible. General Secretary Gorbachev has urged us to look at domestic reform as a clue for seriousness in changes in international relations. And so we have looked at the domestic issues in the Soviet Union. And Glasnost has been one of the two themes, perestroika the other. And in Glasnost, we know in this country that it's not freedom of speech, as we understand it, as a right guaranteed under the law, but rather permission to speak. Our assumption is that you believe that it's permission to speak because through debate and dialogue and conflict of opinion, a better policy emerges. And so you have the case of Mr. Yeltsin, who was one of the chief advocates of Glasnost, and he's sacked, he's gone. Now, to those of us who try to follow what General Secretary Gorbachev has urged us to do, that raises a number of questions. One question it raises is Glasnost withering? What will happen to all of those young economists who have new ideas on how to run the Soviet economy? Will they be squashed? What will happen to those young theater activists who want to change the theater arts in Moscow? Will they no longer have a voice? So the one question that arises from this is, will this have repercussions? Will there be less openness? Will there be less discussion of controversial issues? And the second question that it really raises, in my mind, is has this in any way weakened General Secretary Gorbachev? He's coming to the summit.
Can I interrupt you for 1 second? Could we deal perhaps with one part of this at a time?
If you permit me, I'm a little surprised by the way the question is posed in itself. You yourself invented the version about the fact that Yeltsin violated the principles of Glasnost. He was for Glasnost, and therefore he was relieved of his position. The fact that he was relieved of his position had no relation to Glasnost. We consider the Glasnost is correct, and we confirm it, and Yeltsin was for it, and everybody else who discussed the results of the work of Yeltsin over the past 2 years. So it's unfortunate that you're talking and spending your efforts, you're working against your own version. But with respect to economic problems, problems of our theater, this really, we have a very large movement forward. Today the economists are working on the development of the economy. We're creating new theaters. You know, our oldest theater, the Художественный theater, is divided into two parts now. The new theatrical principles are being confirmed today. I think it's not the topic which it's interesting to discuss right now when we have such a large meeting coming up, when in the world there are conflicts which worry all of us. Let's return to the problems where we could, with mutual efforts, bring use in the international environment.
But I'd like to add a few words myself. Firstly, what we're doing in our country, basically, we are carrying out a democratization process. We're carrying out reforms in the economic machinery. This is a policy which has never, and under any circumstances, which will be terminated, but under no circumstances. As far as Glasnost is concerned, and all that we're doing in our country, obviously the Americans find it difficult to understand this, but I would like to appeal to Senator Bradley. Understand that we're doing this for ourselves, not for you. For ourselves, not for you. That's the main thing. So, of course, we want people to say nice things about us, but this isn't done with an aim so that Americans think about us this way or that way. If we're talking about Yeltsin, then in principle you have a completely incorrect information about it. I'm even surprised that a member of the Senate who has such a slight amount of information can put the question in this way, as he put it.
Senator Kassebaum, I think, also has a reaction to this.
A matter of procedure, Peter.
I think that I would only second Senator Bradley's emphasis that people here in this country are, of course, terribly interested in what's going on in the Soviet Union at this time. And I think that the great interest that's been shown in the Soviet Union by this broadcast is an illustration of how much both people are longing to understand each other. And the new policy of reform that has been initiated obviously has led to an openness such as this program. But I think that there are some extremely important issues before us that we want to get to as we look to the summit. I think it's an opportunity today for us, and we're at a particularly important time in our relations with the U.S. and the Soviet Union, And we can't overlook the importance of understanding each other. People in Kansas, my home state, will say, but can we trust the government of the Soviet Union? And I'm sure your people are saying, but can we trust the government of the United States? Going beyond that are these steps day by day as we try and understand each other. And I think these programs have been helpful, particularly as we're trying to understand now the summit meeting, what's at stake with the INF treaty, if that's agreed to, and what we must do going beyond that. That's of great importance.
I didn't know you were going to start off with an advertisement for this program, Senator, but thank you very much indeed. Leonid, we're going to break for a second because your audience, I think, is now accustomed to the fact, as ours certainly is, that we have commercials on American television and occasionally have them on Soviet television. We'll be back in just a moment.
This exclusive live presentation of Capital to Capital from Moscow and Washington is being brought to you by Citicorp.
Because Citicorp understands the drive to succeed, to do more than just get by, we've become the nation's largest financial services company, already helping 1 in every 5 American families, with more student loans, more home mortgages, more MasterCard and Visa cards than any other company. Citicorp and Citibank, we'd like you to get to know us better. Citicorp, because Americans want to succeed, not just survive.
I spend 3 to 5 hours a day talking to my clients on the phone, buying and selling for them. So when our phone system packed up the other day, it was impossible. It was a mess. I make my livelihood on the phone, my commissions. Without a telephone, I'm broke.
Lou Gossett is annoyed.
Hey, you know, we've got some real bad guys in this country. Abusing public lands, defacing parks, robbing historic sites. These are our lands, yours and mine. You know, the good guys. Now, you gonna let a bunch of bad guys run us off our public lands? Or are you gonna help save the lands? Let's show these bad guys that the good guys always win.
Write Take Pride in America. Post Office Box 1339, Jessup, Maryland, 20794.
Take your pills, watch your weight, cut down on salt. Be in control of your life by controlling your high blood pressure.
Tomorrow, while the nation cries for education reform, one town is doing something about it. And more pay for teachers is just the start. Watch ABC's World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Tonight's program represents something of a technical achievement. You are watching images, sometimes delayed by as much as 2 seconds, being broadcast via 3 satellites above 2 oceans. A primary path carries the signal from Washington and Moscow across Europe and the Atlantic, and a secondary route carries additional pictures from Moscow to an Earth station 700 miles southwest of the Soviet capital, then up to a satellite over the Indian Ocean, down to an Earth station in West Germany, back up to a second satellite over the Atlantic, and then down to the United States in West Virginia. And then it is fed via landline to ABC News in Washington. Soviet television receives our pictures on the same route, but going the other way. Viewers are watching a completed program whose signals have traveled almost 250,000 miles. That is farther than from here to the moon. Welcome back to this live broadcast between Washington and Moscow. Let us go to Moscow.
I'm sorry, Peter.
Leonid Zolotarevsky.
I'm sorry, Peter. At the beginning of the broadcast, the roll-in was so fast that I wasn't able to introduce your guests, your senators, who are speaking from the Congress today, and I'd like to do that now. You see Senator Nancy Kassebaum, she's on the left, and Senator Bill Bradley. who's taking part in the discussion from the American side. And now, Peter, just a couple of words about procedure.
Leonid, you love procedure.
Forgive me, Peter. Sometimes I really do like it, yes. So, before the commercial, I think our conversation was taking a correct turn thanks to the women who always bring peace to the home, in our world home I have in mind now. Now, with regard to what was said at the very beginning of the broadcast, that previous broadcasts demonstrated a great deal of sincerity and so on, that was very true. Though, frankly speaking, sometimes we were rather surprised at the form of sincerity on the part of American congressmen and senators in their statements, which did arouse surprise, even indignation, not only among our listeners, but among our televiewers. So once again, I would suppose the turn taken by the conversation just now, before the commercial, I think is the correct course that our conversation should be taken, and I hope it will continue in that vein. Thank you. I've finished with the procedure now.
Well, it's also your chance to ask the next question, so why don't you go ahead?
I propose taking some time to discuss international questions in which we could unite our efforts. Today, I think we have a very favorable atmosphere in Central America. You know that there was a conference in Guatemala. The presidents of 5 countries signed a good agreement, procedures to establish peace in the region. You know that Nicaragua was the first country to implementing these procedures. They have committees for peace there. We're talking with the opposition. The opposition could use the press, the radio. But so far, we can't have a normal situation because the Contras continue their bandit activities, and unfortunately, they use arms gotten from the United States of America. And what kind of steps could be taken here? Why does the U.S. so far not reply to the requests of the 5 presidents, and why do you is there still aid to the anti-government forces that operate on the other side, and the American instructors teach them and use American arms?
Senator Casabon.
I think there is strong support in this country for the peace initiative in the region. We've lent full efforts to that. The Congress is supportive of that. There's also a recognition there's genuine opposition that must be taken into account against the Sandinista government. And I would like to ask you if, as a matter of fact, we are encouraging this process and supportive of this process, will you, who have supplied between 1980 and 1986 about $1.5 billion worth of military equipment, be willing to stop that equipment going to the Sandinista government?
First of all, I'm very glad to hear from you that you are for regulation settling of the conflict, and you are for the process which started in Guatemala. I'd only like to remind you that the Soviet Union started to supply arms for protection against these aggressive acts from the territories of other governments. As you know, this is a purely defensive weapons, helicopters, and so on, which have no relation to aggressive acts. So if your continued efforts lead to success, and if these acts from the side cease, we believe that in Nicaragua there will be a normal situation on the base of democracy and on the basis of the acts of the Sandinista government, and we consider that this will be successful.
To your point about U.S. interest and support for the peace process, I was actually in Costa Rica talking with President Arias about a week prior to the Arias initiative, as well as with President Duarte. When I came back from that visit, I felt the beginning of a sense that if democracies act in their own self-interest, it'll be in the interest of all democracies. That's what's going on now in Central America. We hope that every issue will be resolved. We also know that the Arias plan not only means the cutting off of aid, but it means the ending of aid flowing through to insurgents in other areas in Central America, the elimination of sanctuaries, democratization process, full amnesty. We believe that if this works, it will be the best way.
Do you believe, Senator Bradley, as some Americans do, that the Sandinistas are a surrogate for the Soviets in Central America?
Well, I think that the Sandinistas have had their own agenda. And I frankly think that the Contra aid was a leverage that brought Ortega to the table to sign the Arias Peace Initiative. And I would hope that now that there is an agreement in progress, that we get it resolved. But I do think the Contra aid was leveraged to get him there to sign the agreement, which he never had before.
I'd like to hope that this is in fact so. And we know about the efforts made by a number of our colleagues from the American Congress, which have been taken in order to reach a settlement on a sound basis. In particular, in the press, the mission carried out in this connection by the Speaker, Mr. Wright, was very widely publicized. We know about the press conference which was held by Senator Dodd, the Democrat, which is also highly commended by public opinion in the Soviet Union. But unfortunately, the administration does not always act in directions which are to be seen among many congressmen, because, for example, quite recently, the president of Nicaragua was on the territory of the United States, and he didn't meet the president, nor any of the representatives of the American leadership. This would have been an excellent opportunity when it would be possible to get in contact and have talks, at any rate to start such contacts.
Mr. Primakov?
The Congress, just a minute, please, just a minute, I'm sorry, a minute.
Okay.
I would like not to be interrupted.
I wanted to ask a clarifying question.
Just a minute, please, please. Just a minute. You're talking all about human rights all the time, and I have a right to put forward my position. Don't deprive me of it, please. I want to say that perhaps if the representatives of the White House had met Mr. Ortega, then there would have been some progress made. But why does not the Congress put some pressure on the administration right now so that more favorable conditions can be created to resolve the problem? This is the question which I wish to ask.
Now, may I ask you a question? Are you aware that the Speaker of the House and the Secretary of State...
No, I'd like you to answer my question, then you can ask yours.
Are you...
I'll answer it. Peter, yeah.
Just let me get the clarifying one here. Are you aware, as you mentioned the Speaker of the House, that the Speaker of the House and the Secretary of State agreed yesterday on a 6-point plan so that foreign policy would essentially rest with the White House here, not with the Speaker of the House, as it was criticized he had done?
Well, in that case, I would have preferred that the Speaker were in charge of regulating policy as far as Nicaragua is concerned.
If I could, I'd like
a question, and he hasn't gotten an answer to it yet.
If I could, I'll try to make the answer.
Let's see to it that questions get answers.
Okay.
Thank you.
The question is, why didn't the President meet with Ortega? I don't know. You'll have to ask the President. I think that the key point is that the problems are resolved in Central America by the democracies themselves. The end of that point is a cessation of aid. But there are many things that have to take place first, one of which is a ceasefire between insurgents and the government forces in all countries in Central America. Now, that ceasefire is a difficult thing to negotiate. It has to be negotiated in the region. In addition, both Daniel Ortega in Nicaragua and Napoleon Duarte in El Salvador have to feel sure that other countries are not being used as sanctuaries, or that equipment is not flowing through other countries to insurgents in their areas. This is a problem which, through the Arias Peace Plan, has been taken by the democracies of Central America. That's where it should be resolved. They are the ones that are most intimately involved. They are the ones that have to live with the plan. They do not want a plan that's dictated from Washington or from Moscow.
In a moment, Leonid, we'd like to talk about another regional issue, which is Afghanistan. We'll be back in just a moment.
Live from the Kremlin in Moscow and Capitol Hill in Washington, ABC News Capital to Capital will continue.
You can see the dream of success in the eyes of people all across America. At Citicorp, we understand the dream. That's why, as Citicorp and Citibank, we've become America's largest financial services organization, already helping 1 in every 5 American families, with more home mortgages, more student loans, more MasterCard and Visa cards than any other company. We'd like you to get to know us better. Citicorp, because Americans want to succeed, not just survive.
If you're concerned about heart disease and your doctor advises exercise, the right foods, and an aspirin a day, you should know that heart specialists recommend Ecotrin when concerned about aspirin irritation because it's safety-coated. Ecotrin, the safety-coated aspirin heart specialists recommend.
Well, the rules governing the definition of a fresh croissant are quite liberal. Sara Lee would like to make its definition perfectly clear.
Nobody doesn't like Sara Lee.
She was motivated by greed, and he paid the price.
I lost 5 years of my life because of your grandmother.
A tangled web that turns to revenge.
Patrick is still slowly and methodically trying to poison you.
Men have killed for less, my dear.
All she cares about is money and power. You better start dealing with this before the police get involved.
You went to the police?
Will Patrick's rage lead to murder?
It's time I made this world a better place by eliminating you from my life.
One Life to Live, weekdays.
Thursday Sledge takes on his greatest challenge.
I don't scare that easily.
Oh, Hammer! Your ex-wife called.
It's Tales of the Ex-Wife. Then the bug gets the prince.
This won't hurt at all. Ah, but this will.
The Charmings. Then a world television premiere. He built an empire, but lost a dream. And no one woman could fulfill his fantasy. He was the king. The king of love. Right after Sledgehammer and the Charmings.
Saturday.
Kids are a part of my life that's broken forever.
Sable defends the children.
Drop it. That's a 38. It won't even stop me.
Then,
The men we're after are vicious.
killers find their target.
I froze.
O'Hara and
Somebody get an ambulance?
Roz was your real grandmother.
Why couldn't you have told me years ago?
Hotel after Sable and O'Hara.
On 2020 Friday, an American soldier's incredible quest for his lost Vietnamese daughter after spotting her 13 years later in a magazine photo. On 2020 Friday.
Tomorrow on Good Morning America,
Israeli Prime Minister Itzhak Shamir.
plus Ronald Reagan's visit to the Soviet Union. See what it's like to be an American reporter in Moscow. Tomorrow on Good Morning America.
Live from the Kremlin in Moscow. And from Capitol Hill in Washington, this is Capital to Capital. Here again, Peter Jennings.
Welcome back. It is late evening in America. It is morning in the Soviet Union. An audience of perhaps more than 100 million in the Soviet Union is watching this, the third in our series of Capital to Capital debates, discussions between Congress and the Supreme Soviet. On the question of regional issues, we wanted to talk about Afghanistan. The Soviets invaded Afghanistan in 1979. Senator Bradley, they're still there.
Well, that's right, they are, Peter. I'd like to come at this question with a little different cut. We Americans are a nation of immigrants. We like to travel. I've traveled through the Soviet Union. I've traveled to, camped in Crimea, in Yalta, in Odessa. I've been in Novosibirsk, in Moscow, and Leningrad. I have been in Irkutsk, talked with your great writer, Valentin Rasputin. I've seen Lake Baikal. I think because of that, I have a deeper impression of the Soviet Union than I would have had I never taken that trip, or those trips. I have also, as a younger man, traveled in Afghanistan. I've traveled in northeast Afghanistan. I've traveled in the Konar Valley. And that's an area that's been devastated by Soviet gunships and Soviet military efforts. I think that, in a way, my heart goes out to the parents of Soviet soldiers who've died in Afghanistan. In a way, they've been told that we're going to defend socialism. They find that there's a hostile population. They find that they're endangered. Many die. I think it was a mistake. I think that many of you believe it was a mistake. And I would hope that you would withdraw.
Well, I must like to say the following about this. The political decision to withdraw our troops from Afghanistan is in existence. When our contingents were introduced there the first time, it was perfectly clear from the outset that it was a temporary measure. But now, there is a political decision that they should be withdrawn, the troops from Afghanistan, that is. But I should like to ask Senator Bradley, with your hand on your heart, as it were, can you assert that in America, and I'm talking about the American leadership, and here I would include also the military leadership, there are not certain forces who would like to maintain their troops in Afghanistan, would like us to keep our troops in Afghanistan so that we're weakened thereby? I'd like you to answer that question first.
Well, I would answer that question by saying that certainly Soviet history is a testament to the strength of a nation repulsing invaders. And certainly the Soviet Union would understand that the burden of any withdrawal rests with the invader. And I would simply come back to the point that I don't think there's a shortcut here. I think that the Soviet Union simply has to withdraw from Afghanistan. That is not a difficult thing to do. It's a matter of admitting a mistake. Countries make mistakes. Countries grow by admitting their mistakes.
Is that withdrawal possible, Mr. Primakov?
But you see, you didn't reply to my question, actually. And I asked it for a special reason. In the institute where I work quite recently, a study was carried out. And we came to the conclusion that the United States now has reached a peak in its supply of weapons to the Dushman, and has reached that point. And that has precisely come at a time when in Afghanistan efforts are being made in order to create a coalition government, in order to stabilize the situation, and to include in that government all people, including those who have weapons in their hands and are now fighting against the Afghan government in Kabul. So how can it now be explained that the United States precisely at this very moment is supplying such a quantity of weapons to the Dushmans? Doesn't this clearly indicate, as far as I can see it does, that you want to hold up the process of stabilization of the situation and consequently hold up the withdrawal of our troops? Could please explain what the situation is from that point of view?
Senator Castleman.
Well, there's no question that there is strong support in urging that the Soviets withdraw from Afghanistan. 115-some thousand troops, I believe, and there have been some reports that, as a matter of fact, progress was being made on your efforts for withdrawal, for a coalition government, and I think that there is strong support here in this country for that, and we could only urge that this be done.
What is it you want for the Soviets to get out, Mr. Primakov? What would you like the United States to do? Is there room here for cooperation?
That's exactly what I wanted to propose. And believe me, I didn't ask this question as a member of the Supreme Soviet to the Soviet government. I'm speaking on my own behalf now. I should like to propose the following scenario, for example. The United States declares that they put an end to their supplies to the Dushmans, and at the same time we agree on a timetable for the withdrawal of our troops. And after you make this declaration, at least for the time being, perhaps for a year, and see what happens during that time, and we'll withdraw our troops. You see? Let's connect them together. I think you're mostly concerned about the fact that our troops are there, as far as I understand it. And we are very concerned at the fact that you're supplying weapons to those forces which are fighting against the government. So in conditions when that government has proposed already the formation of a coalition government, so let's work together on this question, both of us together.
Senator
Well, I would like to say, Mr. Primakov, though, that I don't think the people in the Soviet Union really understand the devastating impact that your invasion of Afghanistan had here. It really ruined the SALT II negotiations. It really poisoned relationships for many years since, and continues to do that because there's great suspicion about what your desires were in Afghanistan and the brutality of that invasion. So I think really it rests on your shoulders to resolve this question and not on ours.
Madam Senator, I'm answering a question which was asked by the moderator. I've asked you a question, but I haven't got any reply to it. In that case, all we're doing is confirming what you said in the first clip, that this is a dialogue between deaf people. Let's answer the questions that we ask each other.
Don't be shy, Senator. Have at him.
Well, I thought I answered it.
The key thing, Deputy Primakov, as you know, is whether the Soviet Union wants to leave under conditions in which they have a puppet government in control. And obviously, we'd like to see maybe even a more moderate government. And frankly, those negotiations have been going on. They continue to go on. The Soviet Union refuses to give a timetable that is soon enough. I think basically that's because you haven't faced the fact that you will have to withdraw because it's in your own interest to do so. I think you know that. And we'd like to try to help you out of this, but I think there's that fundamental threshold that has to be crossed first.
We will be back in just a minute to discuss perhaps other regional issues and the other issues which are going to face Mr. Gorbachev and Mr. Reagan at the summit.
Say, these must be Jack's pen and personal copiers. Great colors.
Yeah, and they copy in 5. You want to see?
Go ahead, make my day.
Everything you need to copy with is in this replaceable cartridge.
I'll do that.
Good thing Canon has PCs for every personality, even pushy agents.
Lighten up, Jack.
These Canon personal copiers are light. Put one in my car.
What a guy.
Now get a $50 rebate on PC3, 5, or 5L.
At Citicorp, we believe it takes people with vision to help people with dreams. So many of our people come from fields beyond banking. Untypical bankers, untypical thinking has made us America's largest financial services company. As Citicorp and Citibank, we're already helping 1 in 5 American families. We'd like you to get to know us better. Citicorp, because Americans want to succeed, not just survive.
We raced 1,900 miles across Australia, powered only by the sun. GM beat Ford and 23 other entries. The GM Sun Racer. Solar technology from GM's Hughes aircraft subsidiary. Drive motor from the GM Research Laboratories. Magna-Quench magnets from Delco Remy. Chassis from GM's engineering staffs. A triumph of GM teamwork and technology. The vision is paying off.
One more cigarette, and your health could go up in smoke. Make this the year you kick smoking right out of your life. Join the Great American Smokeout on November the 19th. It's the one day the American Cancer Society urges all smokers to kick the habit for 24 hours. And if you can make it through one day, you could quit for life. Give cigarette smoking a kick in the butt. Join the Great American Smokeout, November 19th.
You were the first in this family to get into college.
I'm so proud of you.
I can't go, can I? I just can't afford to send you.
I didn't mean to let you down.
I understand. Maybe next year. Maybe.
Hard-working students deserve a chance. Please, support the United Negro College Fund. A mind is a terrible thing to waste.
Live from the Kremlin in Moscow and Capitol Hill in Washington, ABC News Capital to Capital continues. Here again, Peter Jennings.
And we go back immediately to Moscow to the Soviet moderator, Leonid Zolotarevsky. Leonid.
I'll give the floor to Deputy Yeliseyev, who would like to say something about the discussion about Afghanistan.
A very brief comment. First of all, I'd like to categorically stop using the term, the fact that it's an invasion of Soviet Soviet troops, because the government more than 10 times asked us to send in troops. You know that we have a friendly relationship with Afghanistan, and we reacted in a friendly way to the request of the government, whereas the United States now help not the government, but the groups which act against the government from a foreign territory. And if we return to the question of what we would propose, I would consider that we should, together with you, and I simply repeat what my colleague Primakov said, together with you, we should agree simultaneously about cessation of aid to these groups, and then Soviet troops will be taken out of Afghanistan, and on the basis of democratization, on the basis of the committees for peace, which have been formed, there will be a normalization of the situation.
I'd just like to add one thing. I have an optimistic view of the course of events because I'd like once again to emphasize there is a political decision to withdraw the troops. They are going to be withdrawn. And then
when?
I think a good result will be provided by the new round of talks between Pakistan and Afghanistan. When, well, I might ask you when you're going to stop supplying weapons, when you're going to stop other people invading Afghan territories, the Dushmans and so on. Let's make this into a package.
Mr. Primakov,
I don't think everything is that far away.
You answer every question with a question.
This isn't a negotiating table.
But I'm answering.
I do think, though, that
that's right.
When you argue that the government of Afghanistan asked you to come in, I mean, we know it was the Afghan ambassador to Czechoslovakia who stopped off in Moscow on his way back. That's where the invitation came from. I mean, I do not think that it is credible to say that the invitation came from a duly constituted government of Afghanistan.
Well, look, we could go on talking till the cows come home. I don't think this would be constructive, really. It's not a very constructive argument. We'll try and prove that it was legal. You'll try to prove that it was illegal. And I'd simply like to ask you simply, you, Senator Bradley, have just said that you're in favor of a moderate government, a government which would comprise all political forces in Afghanistan. We're in favor of that as well. Let's think how this could be done. The Afghan leadership really decides this question. The people of Afghanistan decide these questions. And now they're aiming at national reconciliation. It's perfectly clear this is happening. A coalition government has, doors are opening to it. 50% of the posts that they intend to transfer to the other parties, even the Prime Minister. So how can we talk about maintaining a particular party in power, isolating all the others? This would be incorrect. This is an incorrect interpretation of what is actually happening in Afghanistan. So try and help this process along, this process of stabilization in Afghanistan. And bear in mind that we don't want Afghanistan to be a socialist state, as you said. This is incorrect. This is an improper viewpoint. We would like Afghanistan to be independent, to be neutral. May I emphasize this once again? It wanted to be a neutral state, a non-aligned state, and exactly what it wants to be. And we wish to have friendly relations with Afghanistan. This is perfectly understandable.
Mr. Primakov?
we have a 2,500 kilometer border with Afghanistan. Yes, I'm listening, Peter.
I was just going to say that, as you've made very clear this evening and very eloquent, it's probably not a subject we're going to solve here this evening, but it is certainly one of enormous interest to Americans. When Mr. Gorbachev and Mr. Reagan meet, there are other issues here that people are concerned about. So perhaps, as we have agreed, we would invite some members of our audience, both there and here, now to make some observations and ask questions. We have many opinions in America. Can we go to the microphone and listen to Congressman Robert Dornan of California?
Thank you, Peter. I would like to address my question to your moderator, Mr. Zolotarevsky. Mr. Tarevsky, Zolotarevsky, I understand that you were close to exploding at the last program, and I was lucky enough to be in the audience all that night. And I don't want you to explode, but I want to ask you some tough questions, as you're asking us tough questions tonight. Like Senator Bradley, I've been to the Soviet Union many times. I love to travel there. I've been down to Astrakhan on the Caspian Sea, Leningrad many times, Moscow, Riga, Kiev. It's a beautiful country. And I find your people very much like our people. Many backgrounds, very energetic people, and very much in love with their country. But here's the tough question. Your General Secretary comes here in 3 weeks, and I'm trying to prevent him from speaking in our Congress. He can speak anywhere he wants, but not in our Congress. That's the citadel of liberty, and no dictators have ever spoken there. You killed an American United States congressman, and you promoted the fighter pilot who shot down a gigantic airliner and killed 269 people. You shot, some months ago, one of our young Army officers who had a right to be where he was, and you wouldn't let his sergeant stop his bleeding, and he bled to death in front of the Soviet soldiers who shot him. You have paid no reparations. You've not even apologized. Couldn't General Secretary Gorbachev find it in his heart to apologize to the family of Lawrence Patton McDonald and all the people on that airliner, pay reparations, and apologize to the parents and wife of Lieutenant Colonel Arthur D. Nicholson?
Thank you, Congressman.
Senator Dornan, you're right. What you said did make me indignant, and I'm sure it made all those Soviet people who were looking at this program, made them indignant.
I doubt it.
And they'll see it repeated in the evening. And I view what you said as a direct attack on a very highly esteemed person, our supreme leader, who in 2 weeks will be a guest of yours. And I think what you said is not only tactless, but politically irresponsible. I'm sorry for being so frank, but that's my view.
And I should like to add the following. Just a minute, please. I want to add the following. I should simply like to say that thank God that this viewpoint is not held by the majority of the American population.
Oh, but it is.
Judging by a questionnaire, have an excellent view of our leader. They understand what tremendous work he is doing in order to introduce principles of peace in international practice. How much he is doing to ensure that even now everything in the world is as it should be. And we get thousands of letters, tens of thousands of letters, telephone calls and so on, all welcoming the fact that the General Secretary is visiting the United States. And then I should like to simply say, individual voices don't add anything. On your country, peace in the world depends. Therefore, you need this visit no less than we do, perhaps even more than we do, and you have to bear that in mind.
Mr. Primakov,
if I could, and Congressman Dornan, let me share an experience with you. In 1964, I played on the United States Olympic basketball team. We played the Soviet Union in the final of the Olympic Games. I went out on the court and I was playing a Soviet forward who was much taller than I was and much heavier than I was. 2 minutes into the game, he cracked me with an elbow right in my neck. And I looked at him and I said, "Budьте осторожны," which means be careful, or more liberally translated means let's have respect for each other. And I think that's a good message. And hopefully we can move on.
An apology for the family of Congressman McDonald? That's a
yes,
rude question?
I agree with you, Mr. Senator. But simply...
Mr. Primakov, I'm sorry,
I can't
but
imagine
in this,
anybody who's taller than you and then I think that if anybody nudged you, then he learned this from American basketball professionals.
Mr. Primakov, I'm sorry to say you have still not answered Congressman Dornan's question. He wants to know, as I understand it, whether or not the General Secretary will apologize to the family of the congressman who was shot down in the Korean airline flight by the Soviet Union. That's a question. It's a legitimate one, I think, isn't it?
I don't think it has any meaning at all.
Thank you, sir. We'll be back in just a moment.
Thirsty Sledge takes on his greatest challenge.
I don't scare that easily.
Oh, Hammer! Your ex-wife called.
It's Tales of the Ex-Wife. Then the bug gets the prince.
This won't hurt at all. Ah, but this will.
The Charmings. Then a world television premiere. He built an empire, but lost a dream. And no one woman could fulfill his fantasy. He was the king. The king of love. Right after Sledgehammer and the Charmings.
Saturday, two of college football's greatest rivalries make up an explosive doubleheader. First, it's the classic Big Ten matchup. The Ohio State Buckeyes take on their arch rivals, the Michigan Wolverines. Then it's the biggest game of the year in the Pac-10. Fifth-ranked UCLA sits atop the conference, but the USC Trojans are out to dethrone the Bruins. Two traditional rivals meet with the Rose Bowl bid on the line. Saturday, these two back-to-back classics begin with ABC's College Football Today.
ABC News, Capital to Capital continues, live from the House Public Works and Transportation Committee room. Here again, Peter Jennings.
It has been mentioned a number of times this evening that Mr. Gorbachev and Mr. Reagan are going to meet at the summit shortly, and one of the things they are going to do, if all the I's are dotted and all the T's are crossed, is to sign an agreement by which a whole class of nuclear weapons is going to be eliminated. Senator Castlebaum.
I think it's important as we think about the summit not to have exaggerated expectations of the summit. In this country, we would say a lot of media hype. I think there are 4,000 press credentials that have been asked for at this point. And it seems to me that the elimination of intermediate nuclear weapons is an important first step, but it's only going to be successful if it's followed on. And the success of it really depends on this, with reduction in conventional force strength in Europe and the reduction in strategic offensive missiles. And I think that my question would be, do you anticipate that these will be two issues that you will continue to emphasize as arms talks continue?
Я полностью согласен с госпожой Касыбаум, что это
I fully agree
очень важная встреча.
with Ms. Castlebaum that this will be a very important meeting, and it'll be a first step towards real disarmament. We consider that at this meeting there will be questions raised about the destruction of long-range missiles in order to lessen the danger of a war. We are for lowering the level of arms, of conventional arms. And in this regard, first of all, I would like to express the hope that the meeting will take place in a good atmosphere, and our dialogue will be in the interests of creating this good atmosphere. And I have a question for you as well. What do you think? In the U.S., will the treaty be ratified after the meeting?
Senator
That is the INF.
Yes, I think there is good support, but I think one of the questions still to be resolved is the question of verification. That's a very important issue. The negotiators still haven't fully resolved that. If that can be and resolved to President Reagan's satisfaction, I have every confidence that it will be ratified in the United States Senate.
Can you explain, Senator Kasselbaum, what are the concerns about verification so the Soviet people understand?
Well, I'm not a negotiator, so they've just completed today, or yesterday, the most recent discussions on verification, and I'm not a party to knowing exactly what point they are in tying up some loose ends.
Senator Bradley?
Well, the short question is that if you've agreed to destroy all medium-range nuclear weapons, you want to make sure that you've destroyed all medium-range nuclear weapons. And that is what the verification issue involves. I think we want to move on from verification. And I think that it would be helpful for our Soviet friends to understand that it's the U.S. Senate as a co-equal branch of government that will take a look at the treaty, and it will make its judgments based upon the contents of that treaty. As Senator Kassenbaum has said, there is every expectation that the treaty would be ratified. We view it as a beginning, not as an end. We would hope the Soviet Union would not view it as an end. Hopefully we can move on to strategic missile reductions, and as importantly, that we can move to a reduction of conventional forces in Central Europe. It is in Central Europe where, as you know, there's a great disparity, where there should be a reduction in conventional forces. That's where we are nose to nose with each other. And I think that will be an important bit of evidence to the American people that when General Secretary Gorbachev has said that he wants to eliminate the possibility of surprise attack, when he says that if there is an imbalance, let's eliminate it, progress on conventional force reductions in Central Europe will be an enormously important confirming act for the American people in assessing the seriousness, and I think he is serious.
Leonid, with us here in Washington this evening in the Capitol is the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee. Congressman Aspin, I wonder if you think, based on what Senator Bradley says, that the American people and American congressmen and senators believe that this problem of imbalance can be solved.
I think that's the real question, and the question that I would like to direct to our Soviet participants this evening, following on Senator Bradley's question and his remarks, is the question about the imbalance of conventional forces. I think to all objective observers of the balance in Europe, it is pretty clear that the Warsaw Pact has a lot more conventional forces than the NATO side does. And any reduction in the conventional forces would have to be a disproportionate reduction on the Warsaw Pact side. And I wondered whether the participants on the Soviet side would agree that what we should be looking at is a conventional arms control agreement which would entail greater reduction on the Soviet side than on the Warsaw Pact side than on the NATO side.
Gentlemen.